the Community Playbook for Healthy Waterways, Nitrogen Management Addendum, presented by Steve Suau, Watershed Manager and Professional Engineer. And I need that little.
Oh, he's got it.
Oh, you got it. Okay.
Okay.
One more for me. Okay, so the purpose of this presentation is to present the committee with the addendum to the Community Playbook for Healthy Waterways, which discusses how water quality and quantity data can provide useful management metrics. The connection to the CCMP, this relates to water quality improvement priority action 3, supporting the best management practices to return freshwater inputs to receiving waters to a more natural pattern of quantity, timing, and distribution, and to reduce pollutant loadings. Steve, over to you, please.
Thank you, and it's great to be here in person. Wanted to give a little context. A couple of years ago, I was had the opportunity to work with John Thaxton and the Gulf Coast Community Foundation on this, and Jennifer and David Schaefer on the Community Playbook for Healthy Waterways is what it's called. And basically at that time, I think a lot of the communities here were recovering from the red tide events in like 2017 and 18. And we looked at a geographical area generally corresponding to the Sarasota County region. And I was able to do a deep dive into a lot of the data and questions that people have had over the years, including myself, on different causes of nutrient loads and whatnot. And one of the things that kept coming up was this idea of looking at dissolved inorganic nitrogen as a subset of total nitrogen. And we saw initially in the playbook, looking at a couple watersheds at the different extremes of urbanization and a pretty natural watershed, that there seemed to be some kind of relationship between how much of the nitrogen was in the form of dissolved inorganic nitrogen, which is generally, we used ammonium plus NOx, but particularly nitrate. And it seemed to be in early indications in the playbook that it was much higher in a watershed that had anthropogenic changes in it. So as part of this addendum, more recently last year, I looked at all the water quality data and some of the water quantity data to further investigate the relationship between changes in the watershed and how much of the nitrogen was in the form of dissolved inorganic nitrogen, particularly, again, nitrate. The geographical area that was looked at was again, primarily the Sarasota County region. There were some water quality information in Manatee County. Dave Tomasco with Sarasota Bay asked if we catch a little portion of Manatee County that drains the Sarasota Bay. And then some of the Niagara River watershed, of course, goes up into Manatee County as well. But in general, I think when we included that, there were actually about 75 water quality stations that had data for approximately about the past 20 years or so. Most of it is taken monthly, but it was pretty well done, and we had to do some, as you can imagine, anytime you get in those databases, there's a lot of quality control, there's duplicate entries and that kind of thing for some reason. But so we went through that, and we also looked at some water quantity data for loading. So we looked at both concentrations as a potential tool for looking at management of dissolved organic nitrogen and loadings as well. So I'm going to talk first about the concentrations. And again, there was, I think, approximately 75 stations with data over about 20 years. Actually, probably about, 2006, 2007 timeframe is when a lot of the data started. But it's a pretty good data set throughout the area. And we looked at the percentages of ammonia, and NOx, organic nitrogen, total nitrogen, and looked at the percentages for each of the sites. In doing that, and I'll get into this a little bit later, but just to show, these are all the sites, And they're organized in ascending order of percentage of the nitrogen that is dissolved in organic nitrogen. And what we saw was that, sure enough, the more anthropogenic changes in the watershed, the higher that percentage got. The more natural watersheds, I think, were down around 8 to 10%. The more urbanized or developed watersheds were in the 20s, 30s, or 40s even as a percentage. So we thought about how might you use that as a metric for managing dissolved inorganic nitrogen. And so this is kind of a hypothetical framework that we did for illustration purposes, and it seems to be fairly normally distributed as well. But we looked at anything with a percentage of dissolved inorganic nitrogen of less than 10% as being, we gave it a grade of A+ in terms of that's a pretty well managed watershed for nitrate. And then looked at about 5% increments to form this grading evaluation of how you might manage it. What would be a higher priority would be, of course, something over 50%, which was a pretty extreme. And when we did that and organized the data accordingly, this is color coded by those different gradations of how they fell out. And then we mapped. This was basically using GIS and the watershed boundaries. So this is available, and you can kind of zoom in on areas to kind of look at it, because a lot of the smaller urban areas are more of the hot spots. Again, the green areas are pretty well managed, and they correspond to a lot of the conservation or public lands associated with primarily the Maca River. The one exception that we did see were watersheds in the urban area that were really well, had a lot of stormwater management facilities. And combined primarily with even drainage ways that were designed to kind of back water into the floodplain. So that I think there's a lot of biology available to uptake a lot of the dissolved inorganic nitrogen. But using this map, then we went a little bit further, and we zeroed in on some specific areas that the data was telling us were hotspots. Now, this was a drainage way, Catfish Creek in Sarasota County. And there's a gauge here, monitoring station here, and monitoring station here. They're not very far apart. And they're both, this is at US 41, and this is at Central Sarasota Parkway. And this is the waterway. The percentage of dissolved inorganic nitrogen between that short distance consistently doubled over long term, and which seemed kind of suspicious. But so we did a little bit of investigation, and what we noted was this mobile home park has a package plant. They have a little pond here, and they have an overflow pond here. And basically, you think of this as like a septic tank on steroids. They're seeping nitrate by design 24/7 out into this waterway. And this is something that this is one of the sources of nitrate in these watersheds is any kind of wastewater product. Could be septic tanks, could be these package plants, could be municipal wastewater that does not typically have denitrification in their treatment system, which would pretty much take it to advanced wastewater treatment if they do. So, and there's a lot of them that do have AWT, but if not, the nitrate seems to be about 80 to 85% of the total nitrogen from those waste facilities. So you're getting a lot of nitrate by design seeping out of these areas. And we saw this time and time again as we went through these sites. This is an old private wastewater facility that had a perk pond here. And it was right along a main deep, really 20-foot deep canal. And there was a lot of historical, again, seeping of nitrate along there. This is an old this was an old wastewater treatment plant, Meadowwoods plant, that they actually disposed of the reclaimed water on the area. It was a nursery, I think, at the time. And so there's still some legacy nitrate that still seems to be popping up at the monitoring station downstream. Another mobile home park, same thing. Perk pond along the canal that drains out, and downstream we're seeing high nitrate. And this, lastly, this is another example. This is a real hot canal in Alligator Creek called Briarwood Ditch. There's these old wastewater treatment storage ponds here that were probably just seeping into the waterway. And then on the other side, this is all septic tanks. So we don't know. And there's a lot of indications of legacy nitrogen that from this treatment plant went into these ponds. These ponds are really high in nitrate as well, which is unusual. So there's a lot of potential sources of nitrate. It's not all these packaged plants, but there seems to be a fairly common element that may be a lot of it. This is another mobile home park, same thing, where there's indications of high solid inorganic nitrogen in the waterway. There's a pond here that seeps out into it. So this starts to inform kind of what a priority might be to address this kind of bioavailable nitrogen where it is, and then you can talk about solutions, which I'm not really going to talk about today, but they could be hooking these up to central sewer, but there's also maybe even more cost-effective solutions in terms of denitrification systems, passive denitrification systems, which would be something as simple as a wood chips or sawdust into a trench that would intercept the groundwater and provide some denitrification. So that was looking at concentrations, and we had recommended in the playbook that this dissolved inorganic nitrogen percentage could be used in that gradation form to kind of help prioritize both where you would investigate and where you would direct investments in reducing nitrate for the management of this type of available nitrogen. We also looked at loading. And this was a little bit more tricky because there's not as much flow data available in this region as we'd hoped, but there is some. And so we looked at, combining the volume of water on a monthly basis for all these, the period of record, with the concentration to get the loading of not just total nitrogen, but the dissolved inorganic nitrogen. And not unsurprisingly, rainfall and runoff correlate, of course, fairly well, but loading and total nitrogen correlate really well because the loading is based on the volume, not the rainfall. And then are you able to? Oh, there. Lost it for a minute. Okay, so.
There we are.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so. I think that's the next slide.
Yeah, that one. Then.
Okay. So we also looked every year. Each of these bars, the top graph is total nitrogen load every year, and the bottom graph, I believe, is the dissolved inorganic nitrogen load every year. And you can see that that can every year they can vary dramatically. This is, I think, this might be Irma here, but we are clearly in a drought here. This 2008, that was a drought time, and each color represents a month. Okay, but you can see that in these red and green bars, which I think is August and September, in these wet years, you can get so much loading of nitrogen and dissolved inorganic nitrogen than you get in some years total. The loadings are so dynamic and so driven by the volume of runoff that it can overwhelm really even the concentration. So the volume, in other words, is a huge driver to the loadings, of course. And it's extremely dynamic. Even year by year. So we had a number of areas where we could look at this dissolved in organic nitrogen, total nitrogen load. And when we unitized those by dividing by the area, and I should mention that the areas that we used for each of these gauges are based upon either water management district detailed studies or the local government detailed studies, because those delineations of the watersheds are much more accurate than the widths. As people have probably run across that as well. So we spent a lot of time making sure that the areas were as accurate as they could be, because we divided the load by that acreage to kind of unitize everything so we could compare it. And we saw a similar trend that the more natural or well-managed watersheds had a unit dissolved in organic nitrogen load below 0.5 pounds per acre. But the more urban ones got up to 1 or more. So this could be, if you have both volume and concentration where you can actually develop loads, this could be another way, another metric, if you will, for management of watersheds based upon what that is indicating. And the other thing, and this has been something I've seen over the years and other water quality managers I've talked to, is the total nitrogen load. And when you unitize it, even in particular, they don't sometimes tell you a whole lot. You can have high total nitrogen in a natural watershed, and there's not a lot of difference. There can be, but under a lot of times it's deceiving, because you can't really, the Mac River has a fairly high total nitrogen load. The difference seems to be that a lot of it is in organic form. And in the urban area, in the urban watersheds, a lot of that has been converted to dissolved in organic nitrogen. So it may be a good management tool, and maybe even, I know we have to manage by total nitrogen, but maybe a more meaningful management tool than total nitrogen is to be looking at this form. And most of the lab data that's recorded, they include that breakdown of nitrogen, so you can get it. So that is kind of what we had looked at. I will say, let me see if we can get back to the overall map here. Yeah, so I will say I've looked since at the Charlotte Harbor watershed, which is enormous, and there are about 50 USGS active gauges in that remaining area, which is pretty significant. And there's probably 100 or more water quality monitoring stations. So to expand this effort into Charlotte Harbor would be a pretty significant effort, but there's a lot of data, and I know the Gulf Coast Community Foundation might be interested in seeing that expanded as well. But being so data rich is also kind of a mixed blessing, because going through all that data, as many of you know, is really time consuming as well for QA, QC and all that. So that's basically the overview, and be glad to take any questions.
Yes, I have a couple for you. I'll just save it to my top two. I agree with you about the potential value of total nitrogen versus inorganic nitrogen as an indicator of impacts. I know it is the management standard in Florida, but I've started to notice some departures here and there where I think a better criteria could be used. Sarasota Bay Estuary Program is starting to, at least Dave Tabasco, is starting to promote the use of DIN as an indicator of reclaimed water usage in a watershed. Does your results, I know you did mention that, is it compatible with that view, or?
Yeah, it depends on if I think whether the reclaimed water meets advanced wastewater treatment standards or not is what I'm seeing. Because if it meets advanced wastewater treatment standards, essentially what they've done is added a denitrification element to their wastewater processing.
Yeah, but the key point is reclaimed water is frequently put on at the irrigation demand rate, and even that rate is much higher than what you use for most turf landscapes.
Yeah, no, that's a really good.
At one charge, you've done your whole.
Yes, so the concentrations in reclaimed water, I mean, all reclaimed water is not created equal, depends on the plant. It can be all over the place, but if
Yeah, exactly.
it can be as high as, I think the Sarasota County's B Ridge plant was up around 18 milligrams per liter average, now they're going to AWT. But what I saw when I was working on the playbook, what was interesting is we actually we went into the records of the DMR reports and the concentrations of reclaimed water that was being applied to certain golf courses.
Right, okay.
And then and what I saw was, we had we were able to compute the loadings every month, every year for several golf courses over a 2-year span.
Mm-hmm.
And in interviewing the golf course superintendents, pretty consistently, what I found was they seem to be abiding by the guidelines of IFAS and the manual of how much fertilizer to apply.
Well, the golf course,
on the one hand,
particular high use recreational landscape.
But
Yeah,
but they seem to be applying, abiding by that. But I didn't meet one that really had the revelation that if the water was not AWT, they were applying liquid fertilizer at the same time.
yeah.
They just thought of it as irrigation water. They don't, when they realized there were all these nutrients,
We've noticed
it was a
too.
revelation. Maybe they don't need to apply as much fertilizer.
Yeah,
But in so doing, what we saw with the records was one golf course, the low end was about 60% more nitrogen being applied because of the reclaimed water, and the other one was up to 120% more.
Uh-huh.
So anywhere from 50 to doubling the amount of nitrogen was being applied, primarily because they didn't know that the reclaimed water was really high in.
Yeah. All right, and finally, your observation about trailer park sewer systems. We've in Manatee County, we've hooked up a lot to lift stations and to central sewer. However, in some cases, there doesn't seem to be a decline in the surrounding watersheds nutrient loads, and we attribute it to the poor infrastructure within the park itself. Even connect the outflow of the park into a lift station, if the lateral lines and the structures in the park are old and poorly maintained, and I pretty much guarantee they're not going to be in the greatest shape for most parks that I'm aware of. That you may still have a source in your watershed.
Yep, we saw that in several that have been deactivated. It may not be the infrastructure, it just may be it was applied so long and there's so much that still.
It's still in the groundwater.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've seen situations like that too.
And the soils are just saturated with it.
Yeah.
For years.
Yeah.
Steve, this is good stuff. You've given me some things to think about. That's for certain. As a matter of fact, I made a note about possible denitrification wall in my soon-to-be Captain's Creek enhancement design.
Awesome.
Just waiting, we're just waiting on the Restore folks to send us the funding agreement so I can define that.
Is that in that stretch, by the way?
It's gonna go from 41 to Clark Road.
Yeah, get a denitrification barrier down there along that pond. Because they're stacking water up 6 feet higher than or more than the water level in the adjacent ditch. So it's just got so much head to push water.
All right. You're probably aware that parts of my team anyway were involved with the original playbook. And I asked them, as I was preparing for today's meeting, if they were aware of this addendum, and they're not. I'm just wondering how this addendum came about, and is it scheduled to be adopted into the playbook?
So the only other people that were involved were David and Jennifer Hecker, or Jennifer
Schaefer,
Schaefer.
other gentleman.
Another general.
And Jennifer has put it in, is my understanding.
It is in already.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And I think you just answered my next question as to why you focused on Whitaker. Was that Mr. Tomasco's influence?
So, yeah, well, no, the Whitaker Bayou was selected because it had a really good USGS flow gauge on it. I looked at others, but that was the one that was in an urban area. Someone mentioned Dave Tomas. I think you mentioned Dave Tomasco.
Yeah.
Dave's been involved in or included in this. We've presented a lot of this to Dave as well. So I think I think he sees it as timely with some of the reasonable assurance planning he's doing right now.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I know he is.
I had one question and one comment. The question is, you focused a lot on the Mayaca. You said you've looked a little bit at the piece. It's a big, obviously, effort to do that. Do you have any idea of what, if you were to ballpark, the cost would be to do a similar analysis for the Peace River Basin?
I'd have to look at the water quality data stations more thoroughly to see what their period of records are, because a lot of times there's gaps in the record. The Swift Mud maybe had done it during period than DEP. So it depends on how complete the data of record is. But the flow data you're really lucky. The flow, you've got a lot of really good flow data for the load, hydraulic load, and it's just a matter of matching it up with concentration.
Well, this ties into my comment, which is that we helped to fund the University of Florida, Christine Angelini and Miles Medina to take all of the historical data in the Peace River Basin and QA/QC it.
Wow.
And it was a huge effort. And basically we had to do that because we were redoing our water quality trends analysis on the Water Atlas using a different, newer, more sophisticated methodology. So to make sure that the underpinning was solid, we had to go back through, and he did an incredible job laboriously going through and doing a lot of that work. So I think we have some foundational information that could be in
Yeah,
effort,
that would really make it quite a bit
because he already
easier.
did
Yeah.
that. So I want to point that out and say that that's something I think that we'd be very interested in and trying to see if we could help support is moving forward with a similar analysis in the Peace River Basin.
Okay, well, we'll talk. I think John Thaxton with the foundation is interested in that as well. So we'll look into that.
Okay, and we have just so everyone knows, we do have an FY24 call for projects. That's going to go out in October, early October, that will be looking for research and restoration projects in the area to fund.
I got a question.
Oh.
And maybe it's not a question, but it's actually, how do they permitted these little model homes and things like that when there's no space for anything and you just, how did that ever happen? Who was in charge of that?
No one.
I mean, who's going to take responsibility about that? And it's not just, I mean, I don't want to be sarcastic about it, but yeah. Tell me.
These issues were not, and Jennifer knows this too from the stormwater TAC. Getting into this issue of wastewater byproduct being part of a load that needs to be considered in the stormwater rule was really controversial.
Mm-hmm.
Because historically, I think there's been some change of art and policy maybe on it. How wastewater was treated didn't necessarily consider nitrate. In fact, I guess in defense of municipal utilities that are not AWT, it's a fertilizer that will grow things the way the reclaimed water. So I don't know if anyone back then had the foresight of, but all this all of this nitrogen in the form of nitrate feeds algae and causes things to grow, and some of it's not so good if it's in excess. So I think it's more, we've learned over time that we need to be more in tune with this kind of load of nitrogen.
I have to add to that, though, to say that Steve and I served on that 15 years ago for DEP, where that information was already known. And, we could be doing more to take action based on the scientific data we do have when we have it. Still, the stormwater regs and whatnot have not been fully updated to address those things, so. Then Brandon.
Yeah, just real quick, I think that this is great, and I would take the conversation maybe a half step further and say, rather than turn it into a separate study, something that we've been talking about with SwiftMud is having an interim update to the swim plan, because as part of the swim plan updates, they do their load analysis to determine changes in loading trends over X years or whatever. And would love to see an interim update, but maybe we can incorporate what you're talking about as part of that interim update. And really kind of expand that analysis beyond TN and TP and see if we're holding the line from the organic perspective. And to me, I think that would give it, having an agency, a regional agency leading the charge on that would give the conclusions a little bit more, for lack of a better way of putting it, that would make it maybe a little bit easier for us also to take action on. And so I want to maybe throw that out to y'all and Chris and the gang, maybe something that we can talk about. Because the last swim update used data, I want to say through 2016, I think. So we're talking, pre-Irma and all of that. So, I think we're getting to a point where, I would love to see how things have shifted over the last few years, given recent events. Would be great. So, and then also just real quick, jumping on the golf course thing. I mean, we've been pulling samples from our reclamation facilities and reclaimed water ponds since June of 21 to get an idea of the same thing. What's going on in nutrients. We're seeing ammonia concentrations as high as 5 to 6 milligrams per liter alone at the point of intake that the golf courses are pouring the water into their ponds. So that's after it's been mixed with stormwater, with groundwater, and whatever. That's not straight reclaimed water. So, obviously that, and on top of that, I mean, we caught earlier this winter, one of the locations along the east wall, we caught ammonia in a neighboring stream over a 3-month period between 1 and 2.3 milligrams per liter. That we needed to go and have a chat with the community over there about. So we've had some great chats with the IFAS folks in Sarasota who have their fertilizer calculator, their reclaimed water fertilizer calculator, and got some insights from them about what has worked and what hasn't in terms of developing that and communicating it to the public. Because our intent is we've already been having conversations with golf course managers to see how they do their fertilizing. You'll find that it's all over the place. A lot of golf courses actually do spot fertilizing. They look for the brown grass or the patch of stress grass and they're throwing fertilizer directly on it. It's not necessarily a highly calculated, worked out thing that I'm putting 0.06 ounces per whatever on this at this time. It's grass is brown, dump, and so that's why, kind of building on why it's important to have these conversations. But I would love to kind of build on the conversations with those IFAS folks, with you guys and humanity side, you want to talk about communication strategies and whatnot. I think at the end of the day, my dream would be to see more of a regional based tool and communications effort rather than it's just, IFAS and Sarasota doing everything, whatever.
Yeah, the IFAS tool came out of the Playbook. Yeah, we worked with them on that.
One quick follow-up comment. Sorry. I had recently had a conversation with our IFAS person about representing or communicating the fertilizer value of reclaimed water. And she has been working very hard on a infographic or something that will allow a homeowner to quickly determine what the situation is. And it has proven to be an exceptionally challenging project by her perspective. We would love to have something like Pinellas County does, where you put in your address and out comes your reclaimed water, fertilizer value based on, and how you can adjust it. Because our fertilizer ordinance requires, if you're in a reclaimed water area, to adjust your fertilizer application to your irrigation by reclaimed water. But so many people are in centrally irrigated communities where there's an irrigation utility that is the supply of whatever irrigation water, whatever quality they get. And they don't know. So we have to have some ability to go to that level too and regulate the irrigation utility operations, or advise or encourage them to do the calculations. You'd think at that point it would all be about money and dollars, and they would have interest in keeping a lid on reclaim use, but they're not the ones that are doing the lawn maintenance that is selling the fertilizer. And I think that's where the departure is.
Can I ask, as I should have mentioned, so Florida Sea Grant should have been prefaced by UFIFIS, so hello. Of course, I'm on the marine side of things, not so much the terrestrial side. I call the folks in my office the landlubbers. But what is the block, you think, in that regional strategy? Is it the fact that the offices aren't talking to each other? It's the fact that the tools are hard to develop? Because I could help with that. I feel like there is a regional
We had a lot of
team.
discussion on this one through the playbook, and I think it's that it's not easy data to convey.
Yeah.
And a lot of communities maybe not even really that concerned with it. It's just the enlightened ones. I think that the work that Brandon mentioned that the Sarasota IFAS did,
Mhm.
they've developed a tool. And what you were mentioning in St. Pete, that's it. That's what we think when we did the playbook needs to happen, is to be able to actually, you put in, so what they did in
Yeah, it's a web app.
Sarasota IFAS is done, but it's a matter of taking it to the next level of you putting your address, and based upon what they have it by zones.
Yeah.
By who the utility is. So they know what the average nitrogen level is. It's not perfect, but it is a great start. Then people can, because people don't really know. A lot of, there's bad managers in golf courses, but a lot of the ones that I talked to, I think they were trying to do it right. They just didn't know that there was fertilizer in the water they're using for irrigation. So the St. Pete I think is a really good model.
I was curious as to if I could talk to some colleagues and maybe give them a kick in the butt or try to loop them into this conversation. But I was wondering if, from your guys' perspective, if the reason that hasn't made its way down here has to do with just a simple lack of communication, and then everybody's, got not enough time to do everything, or if it has to do with actual data, inability to actually get the tools together that makes it complicated.
I will say it's a little bit of everyone. It's a complicated message to communicate, a very complicated message. The heterogeneity of the source, the reclaimed water quality, is very large. The number of entities, or the entity that you have to contact, is not at all clear in some cases. The engagement point is not at all clear, whether it has to be a neighborhood or community association or an individual homeowner. And then you got the addressing situation. How do you adequately identify where you're at? Well, street address is the best, but then you've got to mold all those other characteristics into your street address, and how is that address serviced? But that's the one that works the best. If you can just pop up a address or neighborhood and give an estimate of your reclaim addition and how it affects your fertilizer planting.
It's definitely a good conversation. And there's lots of different avenues we can.
Yeah.
And I think every one of them is worthwhile, but we do need to move it on. So maybe we can, take some of those conversations offline, or maybe come back at a future meeting.